right after you.
6 o'clock, right?
Yes, so I have to channel the vegetable walking around. I will be very fast.
Dank je wel.
Dat is heel hartstikke leuk.
Yes, at that table also.
Good. No,
Like
here,
yesterday.
here.
Okay.
I want to be in the with the book in a row. Okay, very much. Thank you. Everything you do for me, not only driving.
Works.
Are you asking questions again? I warn you, when you start talking too long, I'll tell you. I'm joking. You can talk as much as I don't think the audience is not exactly overcrowding. Bonjour. Ist genau 5. Niemand da. Do you want me to go and
Ja, buenos días.
shepherd them in?
1, 2. 1, 1.
Hmm.
Moi, j'ai trouvé vachement forte avec cette histoire de phare. Je sais pas à la base. Je sais pas, c'est un truc, c'est une espèce de. Personnel, quoi. Je veux dire, j'aime pas trop le stress. J'aime bien un peu l'interaction. Thank you so much. Did I give you mine? Yes. Okay. Thank you. We enjoy. Okay.
Get them in, Themis. I'm perfect, sure. I even now know how to pronounce the name properly. I asked her.
So you
Also the
collecting
first name.
mapping one to the thing.
It's long. Yesterday was very long. I remember Kostkos was very tired. And then he left and I thought, poor Femis, but can she not go? But she didn't. You stayed till the end. I went back and had a little sleep for about 20 minutes. You can't do that here, no? Get them in, please.
Okay. We are not in the.
No, but I don't want to cut him short if people ask long questions. And right after this plenary, we have the last panel. And then we have the conference dinner. Are you looking forward to that?
So the peace of the community. I was in holidays in Albania also in summer. I don't know if I told you about that. And I was struck by the fact that the quality of the maps is still cheap. Albania, yeah, yeah. It's so there is a job to be done still, you know. In Europe, in Europe.
There is an expectant silence in the room, which usually comes before the storm. I mean, Professor Lequesne's speech. I have to look up the name again.
You know, Saturday, 5 o'clock.
Yes.
You cannot blame.
Yes, I know. It's.
You have to be.
Do we have to be grateful for people that are here? No. I think we can start. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fourth and last plenary speech by another renowned expert in the field. I'm speaking about Professor Christian Lequesne. He is Professor of European Politics at Sciences Po and Director of the Centre d'études et de recherche internationale, and also a professor at the College of Europe. He is also a visiting professor at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, and therefore he can speak German, as I found out. He was the LSE Sciences Po Alliance professor at the London School of Economics, holding a chair funded by the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He also was the Theseus University professor at the University of Cologne in German Köln. He is on the editorial boards of many important journals relating to politics, and he is also a member of the advisory board of the Prague European Summit. Today, he will speak to us on the topic Enlarging the EU Union, the reactivation of a sleeping agenda. What a lovely title. Please come up, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Chairwoman, for this very friendly introduction, and I would like to express my gratitude to the president of the Greek Hellenic American University for this invitation, and also to Professor Prevelakis, who I know for some years, if I may speak so. So, very interesting debate since yesterday, and I'm glad tonight to offer you also my own food for thought about EU enlargement. Well, as some of you have probably read in the press, the Czech presidency of the European Union will welcome in Prague on the 6th and 7th of October the first meeting of the new so-called European political community. It's a French idea, and it was expressed for the first time by the French president in his speech to the European Parliament. It was on the 9th of May, in order to allow, I quote, Monsieur Macron, the democratic European nations adhering to a set of values to find a new area of political security, economic and social cooperation in energy, transport, investment, infrastructure, etc., etc. So, I think with the recent application of Ukraine to the EU, you have follow, of course, this event, which was joined with the application of Georgia and Moldova. This Prague initiative raised hopes that the EU would have a new tool to foster closer ties with the candidate countries of Eastern Europe. And when I'm talking about these candidate countries, I have to be precise. There are currently 7, 4 in the Balkan region, Albania, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia, and Serbia, and 3 in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. Some of these countries, such as Northern Macedonia, are waiting for 20 years, or about 20 years, after experiences various obstacles about the name of the country. I don't have to go into detail. Well, you know about this controversy and the compromise which came with the Prespa agreement. Now for Northern Macedonia, there is another issue with one member of the European Union about, well, the Macedonian language, and we found some compromise. Well, of course, politics in the Balkans still refers to emotions and emotional nationalism. We know about that, but the European political community could create precisely an intermediate step between simple association agreement and full membership without waiting for the candidates to be fully ready to assimilate European law, which is a very, very long process. Those who come from Central Europe here knows that it took 10 years for the countries of Visegrad, 13 years for Bulgaria and Romania, 9 years for Spain. We have forgotten that, but between the application of Spain and the full membership, well, it's a decade which took place. But the choice which is made for the Prague meeting seems to be different. We don't have a lot of information, but what we know for the moment is that it would be a large forum bringing together 44 heads of state and government, so the 27 representatives of the EU member states, the EU candidate countries of Balkan and Eastern Europe, I'm not going to quote them again, a certain number of states sharing with the EU the rules of the European market and also the values, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, but also Great Britain, Turkey, and Azerbaijan. By including those last country, and by including Turkey, a country with a frozen membership to the EU, Great Britain and Azerbaijan, even if we don't know if Azerbaijan is going to attend now because of the problems with Armenia, it is clear that the European political community will have difficulty in promoting, in prefiguring the integration model embodied by the EU, and this for obvious reasons. I was in Istanbul 2 weeks ago discussing this issue with some Turkish friends and colleagues of think tanks, and they were all, well, on the same line. They were not particularly supportive to Mr. Erdogan, those people, but they were all convinced that if the EU moves in the direction of promoting its integration model, Turkish president will immediately say, well, this is not the question, right? We're not here to talk about the normative model of Europe. And we can imagine that the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Mrs. Tusk, will probably say the same after Brexit. So for those countries, the European political community is seen just as a forum for exchange, for dialogue with the EU, but not much. Not much. And of course, it's a satisfactory situation for Turkey and the UK, and I could see that from the reactions in Ankara. But it's also frustrating for the candidate countries of the EU, because you have again the risk of seeing this European political community as a new backdoor, you know, which is invented not to promote the enlargement, but to delay the process of joining the EU, which is their final goal. Their final goal is entering in the EU. And we had some, well, previous experiences. Some of you probably remember 1990, the idea of confederation. It was an idea brought by another French idea, but President Mitterrand. Of course, the situation was a bit different at this time because the proposal included Russia, so this was absolutely not acceptable for the Central East European countries. But another issue which was raised, especially in 1991, when we had also a conference in Prague on the European Confederation, especially by people like Václav Havel, who was the president of the new democratic Czechoslovakia at this time. Well, this is a way to delay enlargement. What we are interested in is being members of the European Union. And it's for us, I mean, academics and scholars, a real question, this question of, well, does an alternative to enlargement exist for those who want to enter the European Union? Probably the answer to the question is no. With the aggression of Ukraine by Russia, I think it's important to come back to enlargement because we don't have to lose the sight of the European objective, which is establishing a community of values. I know that the title of this conference is, well, Europe in discourse through values, histories, and borders. But this question of values is not just a naive question. Because if you take the European Union, well, values are added values. Greece became a member of the European Union because Greece, well, decided to go to democracy after the colonial regime, and it was a way, of course, to speed up membership, this process, and we could find many examples like this. So this is an argument I would like to make today. I don't think that the argument of normative Europe is just an outdated argument, because the war in Ukraine makes it, again, very valuable. And we have to go back to the essence of the EU treaties and to the Charter of the Fundamental Rights of the EU. As you know, this is a political prerequisite that is required from candidate states during accession negotiations. But there is also a new geopolitical context which requires a rethinking of the accession process, because we don't have to forget that enlargement is providing stability. And this is something which is sometimes difficult to see when we are inside the EU, because inside the EU, what are we looking for? We're looking for the question of fair competition between the member states, functioning of the internal market. But if we take a perspective also from outside, for instance, when we look at the EU from other parts of the world, it's absolutely clear that enlargement does not mean only risk of dilution. It means also creating forms of stability and geopolitical stability. I know that politically it's not easy to propose new memberships when some leaders from Central European states in particular totally ignore the EU principles and values. That's correct. Viktor Orban is clearly the best enemies of the candidate countries of the Balkans and Eastern Europe. Definitely. I also know that after 15 years of enlargement, countries like Bulgaria, like Romania, are still under the supervision of special monitoring mechanism to make sure they respect the EU requirements is still there. Well, enlargement has never been the magic solution to eliminate all the obstacles to the rule of law. We all know that question of applying the rule of law has to do also with domestic process and mobilization of the societies. It cannot be totally imposed from outside. But let me ask a very simple question. How would be corruption today in Bulgaria and Romania if the countries would not be in the EU and would not have the obligation to give some form of accountancy? Okay? I think question, the answer to that is that it will probably be worse, all right, even if it's not currently ideal. For this reason, I think it's essential that we take again the enlargement process seriously, and that we also consider that the new European political community must have a link, a connection with EU enlargement. If we mix up the candidate countries with other countries without a realistic European perspective, right, like Turkey or the UK, I don't think the EPC, the European political community, will help to strengthen the rule of law and to create some form of geopolitical stabilization of the continent. So it's crucial to reactivate the normative agenda through enlargement. And this is what Chancellor Scholz pointed out in his speech in Prague on the 29th of August, recalling that, I quote, well, he first said, I'm supporting the French idea of the European political community, but then he added, but the enlargement of the EU is necessary to ensure stability within Europe and to protect common values, end of quote. I'm not saying that it is not important, of course, to have a good dialogue between the EU and Turkey, or between the EU and UK. Of course, we need to have good relations and good exchanges. But they cannot be put in the same category than the countries of the Balkans and Eastern Europe which want to join the EU. So this is why, and we're going to publish with my colleague and friend Thierry Chopin in a couple of days an article in the French newspaper Le Monde about that. It has been accepted by the newspaper. They just wait for the momentum, as always in the press. I would suggest that the European political community dissociate the two groups within its setting. Candidate country must receive more than a chance to speak in a new talk shop. They must be invited to have a political status in the perspective of joining the club. And it is, of course, absolutely obvious that most of these countries, if you take Ukraine, if you take Albania, if you take Serbia, will take time to respect the criteria, and especially the economic criteria and the criteria of the EU single market. But we also know that there is no fair market if it's not regulated by political principles and values. So let's offer them a chance to start consolidating the political criteria of enlargement and maybe offering a special status within the European political community. Edi Rama, the Prime Minister of Albania, has recently stated the possibility of offering an associate member status for the EU candidate countries. Well, there are other institutional formula. We can imagine also an observatory status for candidate countries for their deputies in the European Parliament, for instance, without a right of vote, of course. We can think about a better inclusion in all EU citizens program, increasing mobility. It's very important also to have this societal work. Erasmus Plus, of course, is an excellent tool to promote the mobility of academics and talents, and we talk about that with Professor Rousigne yesterday. But there are limits due to the modest amount of the individual scholarships, right, which are offered. So why not reflecting about a very special program of EU scholarship devoted to students of the candidate countries with clear selection criteria? This is something possible. Political work has to be consolidated in the EU member states to make sure that the public opinions do not see enlargement just as a new competition and a way to dilute the community acquis. And here, if you look at the polls and surveys, well, we have to be very realistic. They show that in many EU member states, I have to say more in the west than in the east of the continent, there are some clear reluctance about having new member states in the club. And the question which is raised by the citizens is not about the effect on the EU decision-making process. It is free movement of persons, business competition, perception of organized crime, which will be reinforced. Of course, I'm not saying that organized crime is not operating in Albania and Ukraine. Of course. But we also know that the EU cooperation between police and judiciary, the participation to the European Prosecutor Office, for instance, in Luxembourg, are also the best way to reduce the problems, because they push towards better coordination, right? Let me add that some Western countries will be also happy to have manpower coming from the new member states. They lack resources on their own markets. Membership facilitates employment procedures. For a German company, it makes a difference today to employ somebody from Romania, a computer scientist, for instance, and somebody from Moldova, except if the Moldovan person has also a Romanian passport, which happens sometimes, right? But never forget that the EU has also benefited from the previous enlargements from an economic point of view. Membership has been an excellent deal for German, Italian, Austrian industries. It has also been a geopolitical benefit. Membership to the EU, of course also to NATO, is what has protected the Baltic state from outside destabilization. If Ukraine had the protection of Article 47.2 of the Treaty on the functioning of the European Union, maybe, we don't know, but maybe Vladimir Putin would have not decided first to invade Crimea in 2014, and then the rest of the country in 2022. So, enlargement, and this is something sometimes difficult to discuss in some member states, especially in my country, for instance, France, does not mean necessarily dilution. Future enlargement does not mean necessarily being contrary to the interest of the EU. provided that we take lessons of previous enlargement and seize them intelligently. And I think that if we make a perspective in the next, well, regarding the next 10 years, EU member states that refuse to see this reality will cope with the risk of weakening their leadership in the long term. Germany has understood this, as evidenced by Chancellor Scholz's words in his Prague speech. UK is not there anymore because of Brexit, and to a certain extent, it helps in terms of perceptions, because it's true that for some British conservatives, enlargement was seen as a delusion. I do agree in the neoliberal approach of the market. Let's enlarge as much as we can to diminish the role of institutions. Well, this problem is not there anymore with Brexit. So there is a question of France, and I think in initiating the project of the European political community, the French president belied the reputation for being inhibited towards the eastward enlargement of the continent. And the problem is that France is not opting for a clear link between the EPC and enlargement. And I think it's a mistake. It's a mistake because this is the best way to preserve French influence in the middle long term. If not, Germany will again be seen as the country which favors the Eastern enlargement when France hesitates because of, traditional reasons. And I don't think this is a wise position. So an ideal position will be to have a sort of Franco-German also initiative around, well, this new issue of enlargement. The French reluctance has to do with the fact that we are convinced that influence of France is somewhere else, Africa, Middle East, etc. Well, in foreign policy, you have narratives, right? And it's very interesting to see how these narratives are reproduced by political elites all the time. But the reality is that France has difficult time in Africa because of a mistrust of the public opinion, right? And the progression of the anti-French feelings, and in consequence, the advance of the Russian propaganda. We could see that in Mali, we could see that in Central African republics. Decolonization is an ongoing process, and France, as a former colonizer, has difficulties to find vis-à-vis the society's new modus operandi and channels of exchange. Eastern Europe and Balkans are easier regions for France in terms of historical past. And this is why I think it would be important for France to engage together, maybe with Germany, in the management of the eastern margins, a perspective on which probably the two countries could find money support in the EU member states. So it's the political future, it's the grand design of Europe, right, which now must be a priority with enlargement. The EU must again offer its normative model as an alternative to the authoritarian design of Russia in Ukraine, but also in Georgia, in Moldova. It must also be an alternative to the competition of several authoritarian states in the Balkans. The soft power strategies of China and Turkey in the Balkans have clear objectives. My friend Jacques Rupnik recently told me that 2/3 of the Serbs considered in surveys before summer that Russia had maybe good reason to invade Ukraine. It must resonate in the EU. And I think it's not impossible to reverse this tendency, of course, if EU enlargement is offering clear perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, EU integration has always been a political project, but a political project that favored, as it has been said this morning by Professor Romero, economy as a mean. I perfectly know that the EU economy, well, had severe crisis in the last 10 years, and sometimes with very harsh social competences, and the Greeks know about that. We do not forget the situation of Greece, especially in 2008. But it would be also unfair to say that Greece was left behind by the EU. 3 bailouts came from Europe, even if they were accompanied by strict conditionality. The single market is a great achievement. It's probably also one of the most important achievements, has the Brexit negotiation showed, right? You remember the first steps of the Brexit negotiation when the UK wanted to introduce a flexible single market with ad hoc rules, etc. And they were expecting support from those who were close to the UK during, well, the time of membership. I'm thinking about the Netherlands, I'm thinking about Sweden, I'm thinking about Poland. But no way, all those countries decided not to make any compromise on the question of principles of the single market. Okay, and it was a big disappointment, of course, for some of the harsh Brexiters. But if the EU has chosen to focus its integration on economy, well, there are historical reasons. It was also because the Cold War did not leave a lot of flexibility for the management of geopolitics, but the current situation is totally different. And geopolitics has become, in Europe, the core of the reflection. It is why enlargement must go together with the reinforcement of what we call sometimes EU strategic autonomy. It is important, I guess, that the EU member states do invest more in defense than they did. We see interesting moves due to the sad, invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but we have some move. We talked this morning about Germany and the decision to modernize the German military instruments in injecting 100 billion euros. We can also think about Denmark, which decided to reintegrate. I know that in terms of global defense of the continent, Denmark is a relatively small country. But the fact that Denmark decided to renounce to the opt-out and to go back to the European defense provision of the treaties was a clear sign. Mm-hmm. Of course, we could discuss, and we have done it, and I don't want to go too much in this direction about who is the real winner in terms of security of what is happening in Ukraine. Is it more NATO than the EU? But on this question, I would like very much to follow what has been said by Federico Romero this morning. The problem of the transatlantic security guarantee is that we consider in our mental map of Europeans that this is something, automatic, which will come if the situation goes wrong. But what about a leader in the US which decided not to play the game of the international liberal order? And we saw that it's possible. We had Donald Trump, right? We had Donald Trump. Of course, we're very happy with the fact that Joe Biden was elected after him, but what about the next election? Mm-hmm. We can have a leader like this. So isn't it important in this case to have also some, guarantees in terms of security coming from our own resources? I mean, the European resources? I think so. Geopolitics is now the main challenge of the EU. I'm repeating it. It has to change the minds in Brussels, in the capitals, toward considering more seriously hard power issues on the agenda. If the Turkish enlargement does not make sense as long as AKP is ruling this country, I think the enlargement towards Balkan and the East belong to the responses that the EU must address to the new geopolitical challenge. And this is why I would very much support the idea of reactivating the sleeping agenda. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for this inspiring and passionately delivered speech. We now have a Q&A session, and I would like to ask you, Monsieur
Lequesne,
whether you would like to take the question or whether you would like me to channel them and pass them on, if you like them or not. What do you
yes,
prefer?
please challenge them, and you know what? I'm going to sit next to you.
Oh, good, yes.
It will be much more informal.
Yes, absolutely, do that, sure. Let me move a bit. Can you go in? Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, ask your questions. We are all set here, the two of us. I will not answer, I will just smile. Questions? Yes.
No.
I'm from candidate country.
Okay, we know.
And my question concerns the mechanism of decision, because with this mechanism of veto, the new member countries like Bulgaria, like Croatia, they will stop any ambition of enlargement. For example, I know then Croatia can block Montenegro about the borders with Montenegro, also Serbia. In this moment, we had the problem with Bulgaria, and this is a very important question to resolve. Probably this new committee can do something, but in this moment, really the situation is is not very ambitious. And for other side, really, your speech about support of enlargement is very encouraging for the peoples in the Western Balkan. I would like to say something about your constant about the Russian invasion. It's not only Serbia when public opinion support Putin is the same, or for example in Bulgaria, in Northern Macedonia, in Republika Srpska, in Montenegro. This is the problem of maybe fake news, because the people didn't understand the situation, for example, position of Azov battalion and a reaction of Putin, or autonomy of Donbass and Lugansk, etc., etc. For this reason, maybe the people is victim of this fake news. For other side, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Bulgaria support Ukraine's resistance and war.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ruzin, for these two questions. First question, decision making. Well, this is an old problem because, as you mentioned, the decision making process is based on unanimity, right? And it has even been reinforced in the last 2 years with the introduction of the so-called new methodology. You have well discussed it a lot in the candidate countries. It was a French idea, which was then taken by the EU Commission. Why reinforcement? Because now with this new methodology, there is a possibility to block at every step of the negotiating process. But this is just a consequence of the sad stories with Hungary and Poland. This is so again. I know that there are some discourse in these countries about we support the enlargement, etc., etc. Probably, the populist governments in those two countries are the best enemies to enlargement. This is my remark. So the only way to go beyond that will be to reform the treaties, because it requires a reform of the treaty. I don't think we're going to go in this direction. Direction of reforming the treaties in general, there is a big question mark. The German coalition said that this is a possibility. Now the trilateral coalition in Berlin. If you look at Mr. Macron's statement, it does not exclude it. But even if we have a reform of the treaty, I think we're going to speak a lot about Schengen. We're going to speak about reinforcing the mechanism of the European and Monetary Union, but probably not change the decision-making process for enlargement. Your second question. You're absolutely right to raise the fact that it's not just Serbia, and it's important because we don't have to stigmatize Serbia, right? There are other countries, you mentioned them, where you have also this support, diffuse support for Russia, when in other candidate countries it's totally the opposite, right? And the difference between Serbia and Albania, for instance, is absolutely striking. But I don't think it's just a question of fake news. Of course, fake news exists, and now you have a possibility to, accelerate this movement of fake communications through social media, etc. But I don't think it's the issue number one. Of course it helps, but the real issue is political alternative, right? It's a question of offering a real political alternative. If you don't offer a political alternative, then in this case you will encourage the rise of nationalism, and you will have more and more fake news. So this is why it's important to have a political discourse, right? And also a strategy in terms of enlargement, and not seeing enlargement just as a technical negotiation where you go chapters by chapters, etc. Of course, this is important. It's absolutely crucial that experts negotiate policies, but it has to be accompanied by a political discourse, a narrative, and this is what certain number of people were expecting from this new European political community, but I'm not sure we're going in this direction. because of the choice to have this large community, I think we miss the link with the political narrative of enlargement. And this is probably a mistake.
Any further questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please be a bit more active.
Nicht schlafen.
Nicht schlafen, nein. No, they look awake, but they don't. Maybe you intimidated them by your Werfe. Hello, come on. One question. Yes. A woman to boot. Very good.
Exactly.
I would like to ask you, in fact, I would like to hear your comment on the cases North Macedonia, and what do you comment? How would you comment introducing bilateral problems between concretely between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, introducing the bilateral problems in the negotiating process of enlargement, for the enlargement? What do you think about the European constancy in the European values? That's my question.
Well, I think that we have to accept realistically that this kind of problems, well, are manifold in the Balkans. And it's linked to emotional nationalism and to history, right? But and we cannot go against that just from Brussels like this, right? It's corresponding to a certain number of social evolutions, historical evolutions, etc. But it's also the responsibility of the EU to, well, first of all, find compromises and sometimes say, well, it goes too far, okay? Well, we have found now this compromise with the parliamentary statement in Skopje, but this is an engagement to change the constitution in the future. But as you know, to change the constitution in Northern Macedonia, you need 2/3 of the votes. So not sure that this 2/3 could be reached. That it's possible due to the political force in presence at the Northern Macedonian parliament. But I found positive the fact that we try to find a compromise, right? Even if it's very insecure for the future. So the EU has not to be too fatalist and just say, well, you know, it's the Balkans, and in the Balkans, it's impossible because you will have always this kind of bilateral problems, etc. The EU also has to take its responsibility sometimes. And that's the answer to your question. I don't know if it will change the situation concretely, but what else? What else?
Okay. Yes. Another lady, I'm pleased to note.
Thank you. I remember that the frozen enlargement, as you said, it was because the previous enlargement was regarded by the EU politicians as being too fast, because Eastern Europe is not enough ready for being a part of the Europe. I'm from Poland, so that's really, touched us. And we really proved that we are not ready. We don't enough grow to democracy, etc., etc. This is why we have a lot of problem now in Hungary and Poland. So I was thinking for many years that the enlargement is frozen because of the Eastern European countries were not enough prepared, and then will be even worse. Now so to say, we're coming back to, as you know, following you, coming back to enlargement. Don't you think that that the history repeated? That even, you know, the country like Northern Macedonia is prepared already formally for enlargement. There will be the same problem in the future when we're facing now with Central Europe.
Thank you very much. First of all, I don't think that the fact that we didn't talk about enlargement seriously in the last 5 years is just a result of the previous enlargement. It's also a result of the crisis inside the EU. We had polycrisis, as Mr. Juncker said, right? Because we had the financial crisis, then we had the COVID crisis. Well, we had the refugee crisis, and then we have the COVID crisis. So in this period of crisis, it was also difficult to concentrate on enlargement because we had to solve many internal challenges. But anyway, I think that what happened with the so-called illiberal democracies play the role, of course. It's something which is not creating trust among the EU member states, and when I say member states, it's not just political leaders, it's also political societies, right? So this is why it's also important to have firm responses coming from the EU when some of those illiberal democracies are really going too far. I know it's a difficult issue, and I will tell you why. On one side, I was very happy that we decided to react to Orban for the first time using the financial possibilities, you know, and blocking the 7.5 million euros from the structural funds because of the legitimacy of the action of the EU in the member state societies. I can tell you, I'm doing a lot of conferences, not with specialists, but with ordinary citizens. And this is always a question which is coming. But some member states are violating the rules. Why is the EU unable to act and to make something? It has an impact on the public opinions. But as always, you have two sides. And the other side is that the populists love to be victims. So victimization is part of the political strategy of populists, right? So having a discourse, we are attacked by Brussels, we are attacked by the, liberal elites, etc., could be also a way to reinforce the position of Mr. Orban, for instance. I think the situation is worse in Hungary than it is in Poland, because in Poland you still have an opposition. In Poland you have a Senate which does not have a peace majority. I know it's one voice, but it's there. And in Poland there are some hope that the elections could change the situation. In Hungary, very limited. So this is why it has an impact also on what is going on with the candidate countries, because we perfectly know that the candidate countries also have a problem with the rule of law. Okay, clearly. So it is why this mechanism, which means that you are very tough with states which want to be members, but as soon as you are members, you can do everything you want, is absolutely unacceptable. And I'm very happy that the financial text, which was adopted under the German presidency, does not require unanimity but qualified majority. And this is a big difference with the use of Article 7 of the Treaty on the European Union, because Article 7, it's unanimity. So if you decided to block the decision rights of Hungary, well, of course, Polish Prime Minister will always say veto. With the financial, and vice versa. With the financial tax is different. You need a yes of 15 members on 27, right? So there is a real possibility to be effective from the EU side. And you have seen that the reaction in Hungary, it will not change Mr. Orbán's vision of Europe and of the world, but, well, they decided very quickly to go to parliament, to have regulation, etc., because they need this money. And it's not just the 7.5 millions from the structural fund, it's also 5.8 millions from the relaunch plan. Okay? So at the end, 14 billion. And we considered that the Hungarian financial situation is so difficult for the moment that what is expected to support the florins is around 18 billion euro. So you say 18, 14s? Okay. It's significant. It's significant.
Any further questions? Yes, the gentleman at the back. That will be the last question. We have a short coffee break again before our last panel. I just...
Hello. A bit of political fiction. If in the next few years you will have a majority of a right-wing populist government in Europe, what would be the main change in terms of policy of enlargement compared to now? Would there be changes, a lot of changes, or it would be the same situation, more or less?
Well, I don't have the impression that it's a problem for the populist in Central Europe. It's the image of having those populists is a problem for the rest of the EU. But I don't think that Orbán or the Polish peace has a clear discourse about blocking the enlargement process. I haven't heard anything like this. But I don't know about Italy, of course, and what will happen if Mrs. Meloni is elected is appointed as a prime minister of Italy. Maybe there is an issue there. But I do not know enough domestic politics in Italy to have a firm answer to this point.
Okay. Thank you very much, dear colleague, for your patience with answering all the questions and for your wonderful speech. And as I said, we have a short coffee break now for those who need it. The others can stay in the room and wait for the panel, for our last panel. Don't walk away. We need you for the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were excellent. Seriously, you were the best speaker. And you have a certain passion, which I